Ever find yourself on a plane, looking out the window at that vast expanse of nothing but clouds and wondering, whose rules are we playing by up here? It's like stepping into a whole different world with its own language and laws, even further from any court we're used to. Well, today we're going on a deep dive into that world, exploring the fascinating and surprisingly intricate Rule Book of Aviation, Annex 2.
What's fascinating about Annex 2 is that it's this hidden system most people don't even realize exists, but it's there, quietly working behind the scenes, ensuring that everything from a casual hot air balloon ride to a transatlantic flight happens safely and predictably.
And it's not just some dusty document for pilots to memorize, is it? It's like this living, breathing agreement that shapes how we experience air travel, even if we never see the rulebook itself.
Exactly. It's the invisible hand guiding everything from how planes avoid each other to what those hand signals mean when you're taxiing to the gate.
Speaking of invisible hands, whose rules actually apply when you're up in the air, especially over international waters? It can't be a free-for-all up there, right?
You'd think it would be a recipe for chaos, wouldn't you? But that's where the concept of state of registry comes in. Think of it this way. Have you ever noticed how, even on an international flight, the flight attendants are speaking the language of the airline you're flying? You might be over a different country, but you're still on, say, Emirates turf, operating under their rules, which are based on Annex 2, but with their own nuances.
That's a great point. I never even thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But it makes so much sense. So Annex 2 is like the baseline, and then each country can add their own flourishes.
Precisely. It's about balancing that global standardization with the flexibility for each country to address its own specific needs and regulations, all under the watchful eye of the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO.
So a bit like jazz, but for international aviation.
Laughs. I like that analogy. There's a structure, a foundation,
Yeah.
but there's also room for improvisation within those boundaries.
Yeah.
And that structure is what we're going to unpack today, using excerpts from the 10th edition of Annex 2, focusing on those juicy bits about definitions, general rules, visual versus instrument flight rules, which is way more interesting than it sounds, and those intriguing appendices on signals and interceptions.
Okay, let's dive into some of those intriguing definitions, because I have to admit, when I first skimmed through Annex 2, I was struck by how incredibly specific some of these terms are. So that they've thought of every possible scenario, from how to define an acrobatic flight, and yes, there is a legal definition to those times when a pilot might have a problematic use of psychoactive substances, which, let's be honest, doesn't just apply to pilots, right?
Absolutely not. That term covers anyone whose job is critical to aviation safety, from air traffic controllers to the ground crew guiding those planes with those orange batons.
Right. It's a good reminder that aviation safety is this incredibly complex system that relies on human judgment and responsibility at every level, not just in the cockpit.
Exactly, and that's where those specific definitions become so crucial, because when you're dealing with something as complex and potentially risky as flight, you need that clarity to ensure everyone is on the same page and understands the rules of the game.
Speaking of rules,
Yeah.
I was fascinated by this section on avoiding collisions. Because let's be honest, that's probably everyone's biggest fear when they get on a plane.
And rightfully so. It's a healthy fear that drives a lot of the safety measures in aviation. What's interesting is that Annex 2 makes it very clear that the pilot in command is always ultimately responsible for avoiding collisions, even if they're following instructions from air traffic control.
So it's not a just following orders situation. There's a lot of trust placed in that pilot's judgment.
There is. But it's a trust built on years of rigorous training and a deep understanding of those rules we're talking about. And while it might seem chaotic up there with all those planes, the rules of the road are actually surprisingly intuitive, much like driving a car.
You mean like yield to the right, but for planes?
Exactly. If two planes are approaching head-on, they both alter their course to the right. And when they're converging at an angle, the one with the other on its right has the right of way and the other plane needs to give way. It's all about creating a predictable flow of traffic, even in that three-dimensional airspace.
That makes sense, especially when you've got hundreds of planes in the air at any given time. But what about those times when you can't rely on visual contact or those fancy radar systems, say in bad weather or, over the ocean where there's no one directing traffic?
That's where things get really interesting. Annex 2 dives into the world of instrument flight rules, or IFR, which rely on instruments and air traffic control to keep those planes separated. It's a whole different ballgame compared to visual flight rules, or VFR, where pilots rely on what they can see out the window.
So IFR is like having a co-pilot in the sky,
Yeah.
constantly guiding you based on data and technology.
In a way, yes, and it requires a whole other level of training and precision, especially when you're talking about those near-miss scenarios, which, by the way, Annex 2 addresses with some pretty cool technology like those airborne collision avoidance systems, or AC.
ACS, that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's pretty close. Imagine this. Two planes are on a collision course, but maybe the pilots haven't seen each other yet because of bad weather or a distraction. ACS swoops in, analyzes the situation in milliseconds, and tells one pilot to climb while the other descends, preventing a potential disaster. It's like a little guardian angel for pilots.
Okay, that is reassuring to know. But even with all that technology, I imagine there are times when things still get hairy, right?
Yeah.
Like what happens when you can't even rely on radio communication?
That's where Annex 2 shows its creative side. It has this whole section on visual signals. Think of it like a secret language of the skies that pilots can use to communicate when all else fails.
Wait, secret signals, like those hand gestures I see those folks using on the tarmac? I always thought they were just really enthusiastic about guiding those planes.
Well, enthusiasm is definitely part of the job. But you're right, those hand signals, or marshalling signals, are another fascinating aspect of Annex 2. It might look like a carefully choreographed dance, but each movement has a very specific meaning, ensuring that those massive planes maneuver safely around the airport.
So it's like a silent symphony of signals, keeping everything running smoothly. But what about those signals pilots use in the air? What are we talking about here? Smoke signals,
Yeah.
carrier pigeons.
Not quite. Though I admire your imagination, we're talking about light signals, specifically using the plane's landing lights and navigation lights in different combinations. It's like Morse code, but with flashing lights.
That's so cool. And probably a lot more effective than trying to decipher smoke signals at 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
So, tell me, how would a pilot signal Mayday with just their lights? All right, give me the rundown. How do I signal Mayday in the sky using only lights?
It's all about a specific pattern with the plane's lighting. Landing lights and navigation lights flashing rhythmically, a sort of Morse code with flashing, especially effective at night.
So it's like you're sending an SOS, but with the plane's lights instead of a flashlight.
Precisely. It's a great example of how Annex 2 helps pilots communicate in situations where traditional radio contact isn't possible.
It makes you realize how much we take those communication systems for granted.
Yeah.
But speaking of signals, what about when you're at the airport and you see those red flares shooting up into the air? I always thought that was just a more, shall we say, dramatic way of signaling a flight delay.
Laughs. I can see why you might think that. But those red pyrotechnics are actually quite serious. They essentially mean stop, do not land.
Oh, wow.
A critical warning that something is wrong, either on the runway itself or somewhere in the surrounding airspace.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense than my delayed flight theory. I'll definitely be eyeing those red flares with a little more respect from now on. But let's transition from signals of distress to something a bit more intense, shall we? What about those times when a plane gets intercepted, say, by a fighter jet? I'll admit I've seen one too many movies where that happens,
Yeah.
and it always seems a little, well, dramatic, to say the least.
Hollywood definitely has a flair for the dramatic, doesn't it? But in reality, Annex 2 lays out very...
So it's not something that's happening every day.
Absolutely not. Typically reserved for situations where there's been a loss of communication with an aircraft. Maybe it has deviated significantly from its planned flight path, or there's a suspicion of unlawful interference on board. Think hijacking scenarios.
Okay, yeah, that's serious stuff. So how does this work in practice? Do those fighter jets just kind of, I don't know, swoop in out of nowhere?
Well, they certainly make their presence known, but it's not about intimidation, it's about communication. And you guessed it, it goes back to those visual signals we were discussing. They're key in these situations.
You're saying those fighter jets are basically using their lights to speak to the other plane.
Exactly. It's like a high-stakes light show, each maneuver with a specific meaning.
Incredible. So what can these signals tell us? Give me an example.
Well, for instance, if you see a fighter jet rocking its wings back and forth, that's basically saying you are being intercepted, acknowledge. Or lowering the landing gear is a clear instruction to land at this designated aerodrome.
That makes sense. The last thing anyone wants is a misunderstanding when there are fighter jets involved. I imagine these procedures have been put to the test in some pretty intense real-life situations.
There have certainly been historical instances where these procedures were crucial in de-escalating tense situations. Really highlights the importance of having these globally recognized standards and protocols.
It's amazing what can be achieved when there's global cooperation and a shared language, even in something as complex as aviation.
It truly is. It makes you appreciate the level of dedication and expertise involved in keeping the skies safe for everyone.
Absolutely. I know I'm going to be looking at air travel a little differently after today. Makes you think, though, if you had to suddenly learn all these rules and navigate the skies yourself, could you do it?
Now, that's a question for another deep dive, perhaps.
Maybe we'll leave the flying to the professionals on this one.
Agreed.
Well, folks, there you have it. A glimpse into the often hidden world of Annex 2 and the fascinating world of aviation law.
It just goes to show that even when it comes to something as seemingly commonplace as air travel, there's always more happening behind the scenes than meets the eye.
And sometimes, those hidden depths can be surprisingly fascinating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.